Oh Lord, I feel the weight so strong. My feet been dragging all day long. Legacy of Emancipation Proclamation. In 1925, the heavy shadow of slavery still lay upon many black men and women in Texas. Though the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed more than 60 years before, around Dallas, freedom was more a reality on paper than in life. The farms surrounding the city were large and wealthy, dependent on cotton and livestock. To secure their profits, white landowners built systems that appeared almost identical to slavery. Black workers were called free. Yet they lived in wooden shacks, labored from sunrise to sunset, and had no true choice to leave. Dallas was a growing city, with railroads, banks, and tall buildings rising downtown. But just a few miles away, on its outer farms, black families remained caught in a cycle of fear and control. Local sheriffs, who were meant to uphold the law, often served as protectors for these farm owners. They looked the other way when abuses occurred and sometimes even helped to chase or punish those attempting escape. This contradiction defined the era. On one side, Dallas was modernizing, presenting itself as a proud Texas city. On the other, it bore the hidden stain of forced captivity, where freedom was denied each and every day. The memory of slavery never truly faded. It merely changed its disguise, haunting the lives of thousands who still labored without hope. The rise of sharecropping and debt peonage. After the Civil War, many black families in Texas believed they would at last own land and build their independence. But by the early 1900s, another system had taken hold, sharecropping. On Dallas farms in 1925, this was the primary trap for black labor. Families were provided a small plot, seeds, and tools, but the costs were meticulously calculated to keep them in perpetual debt. A worker might plant cotton all season, sweating beneath the hot Texas sun, only to discover at harvest that his share scarcely covered the debts claimed by the landowner. Charges for food, clothing, and even the use of mules were added to the ledger. It didn't matter how hard a person toiled. At year's end, the books were fixed to show the family still owed money. This was known as debt peonage, and it was nearly impossible to escape. Sheriffs who should have enforced fairness instead arrested workers trying to leave, accusing them of breaking contracts. In practice, these contracts were chains, binding people to the land without visible shackles, but with cruelty equal to slavery. In Dallas County, where cotton fields stretched far across the horizon, this system guaranteed that wealth flowed to a small group of white land owners, while black laborers stayed poor and powerless. Freedom had been promised. But by 1925, it had been replaced by a cruel imitation where paper debts held the same weight as iron chains, and sheriffs served as enforcers of oppression. Sheriffs as enforcers of oppression. In Dallas County during 1925, the sheriff's badge was meant to symbolize justice and order. Yet for many black men and women, it was a symbol of fear. Sheriffs and deputies, elected by white communities, often used their authority to protect the landowners rather than the people. When a farm owner claimed a black worker had run away or refused to work, the sheriff would arrive not to investigate, but to punish. These lawmen rode the dusty farm roads with pistols on their belts and rifles in their wagons. Their presence meant escape was nearly impossible. A worker attempting to leave could be arrested for breaking contract or vagrancy. Once jailed, he might be sold back into labor, handed directly to the same landowner who had enslaved him before. This cycle of arrest and return made the sheriff's office an extension of the farm itself. The relationship between farm owners and sheriffs was built on power and profit. Wealthy Dallas families funded campaigns and supported lawmen who defended their interests. Ordinary black families, with no access to lawyers or fair courts, had no chance to resist. The testimony of a black worker was often ignored, while the word of a white farmer was taken as truth. For the captives, seeing the sheriff's star glint in the sunlight was a warning. The system was watching. It showed that in 1925, freedom could be stolen not only by landowners, but by the very men sworn to uphold the law. Daily life on the farms. Life on the Dallas farms in 1925 was a life of endless labor. Black men, women, and even children rose before the sun, called by the sound of a whistle or the shouts of an overseer. Their day began in the cotton fields where the Texas heat quickly burned across the land. With sacks strapped to their backs, they bent low to gather the sharp white bolls, their fingers cut and blistered from constant work. The field stretched for miles, and the hours were long. From dawn until nightfall, the work did not stop. When not picking cotton, they plowed rows, fed livestock, or hauled heavy supplies. Meals were simple and small. Cornbread, beans, and sometimes salted pork, barely enough to fuel another day. Water was carried in buckets, often warm by midday, and rest was rare. At night, families returned to wooden shacks on the farm's edge. These homes were little more than cabins of rough boards, with dirt floors and thin roofs that leaked in the rain. Inside, there was no privacy, no comfort, only exhaustion. The sound of crickets outside mixed with the cries of tired children inside. But the hardest part was not just the work. It was the absence of hope. People knew they could not leave without risking violence or arrest. Each day repeated the last in an unbroken chain of labor and fear. This was daily life in 1925 Dallas. Slavery disguised as farming, hidden behind a promise of freedom that never truly came. **silenced families. **. Before we continue with our story, if you're enjoying it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next real stories about slavery. Let's continue. In Dallas during 1925, black families on the farms carried the heavy weight of silence. Husbands, wives, and children were trapped together. Yet each felt the invisible chains that bound them. Speaking out was dangerous. A single complaint, even whispered, could reach the ears of a landowner or a sheriff, and punishment would come swiftly. Families learned that survival meant keeping their voices low and their heads down. Children grew up without the chance of an education. Schools were far, and even when a black child could attend, farm owners often refused to release them from work. Many boys and girls learned to pick cotton before they could read a single word. Their futures were tied to the land, just like their parents. Mothers often dreamed of escape, but fear of losing their children held them still. If a mother tried to run, her children could be kept behind as punishment. The homes themselves were places of silence. At night, families whispered prayers or sang soft hymns, careful not to be heard. These quiet moments of faith and song were small acts of resistance, but they were also reminders of the constant danger. If neighbors heard too much, or if someone was suspected of planning to leave, sheriffs could be called to break the family apart. In a city like Dallas, where businesses and theaters flourished, these families remained hidden in plain sight. They were silenced not only by fear, but by the indifference of the wider community. Their pain was kept behind farm fences where the world pretended not to see. Resistance and secret communication. Even under the weight of fear, resistance never fully disappeared. In Dallas County in 1925, black men and women created secret ways to communicate. Churches were one of the few places people could gather without direct oversight from landowners, though even there, sheriffs sometimes kept watch. During services, hymns carried hidden messages. A certain verse sung louder could mean danger. A whispered line in prayer could signal hope. At night, when the fields were quiet and overseers had gone home, small groups met in secret. They gathered in barns, by riverbanks, or in cabins with the lights dimmed low. Here they shared food, told news of escapes, and reminded each other that slavery, disguised as freedom, could not last forever. These meetings gave strength, especially to the young, who needed to know there was more to life than endless work. Resistance also came in everyday acts. A worker might slow his pace in the field, or hide a portion of the cotton to make the numbers appear smaller. A woman might teach her children letters and numbers in secret, scratching lessons in the dirt floor of the cabin. These small rebellions did not break the system, but they gave dignity back to those trapped within it. Communication often traveled by foot. Messages moved from farm to farm through trusted friends or relatives who risked everything to carry a warning or share a plan. In this way, hope spread slowly across Dallas County, a quiet fire burning beneath the surface. Even in the darkest times, people found ways to resist, proving that their spirit could not be broken. Threats of violence. In Dallas County during 1925, violence was the most powerful tool used to keep black workers trapped on the farms. The threat of a beating, or worse, was always present. Landowners and overseers carried whips, rifles, and pistols as visible reminders of their control. A man who worked too slowly could be struck before others as an example. A woman who resisted orders could be beaten until she could no longer stand. The message was clear: disobedience would not be tolerated. The greatest fear was not just the whip, but the rope. Lynching remained a brutal reality in Texas. Black men accused of stealing, disrespecting a white man, or trying to escape could be hanged from a tree while sheriffs turned away. Sometimes whole communities gathered to watch, turning murder into a public warning. These acts of terror silenced families and destroyed hope. Sheriffs added another layer of fear. With badges on their chests and weapons at their sides, they gave legitimacy to the violence. If a black worker was beaten half to death, the sheriff would record it as discipline, not a crime. If someone was shot while running, the sheriff might claim it was justified. The law protected the oppressors, never the oppressed. Even at night, violence lingered in the air. Families heard gunshots in the distance and knew someone had tried to flee. Mothers told their children to stay quiet to avoid drawing attention, because a wrong word or a wrong look could bring the sheriff to their door. Violence was not random. It was the system itself, designed to keep people in chains without visible shackles. The few who escaped. Despite the danger, some brave men and women found ways to escape the Dallas farms in 1925. Leaving meant risking everything. A runaway could face dogs, armed riders, or lynching if caught. Yet the promise of freedom was stronger than fear. Those who escaped often traveled under night's cover, moving silently along back roads, guided by the stars or by whispered directions from others who had tried before. Many walked for miles barefoot, with only a small piece of food hidden in their clothes. Their destination was often Dallas itself, where they hoped to blend into the growing black neighborhoods, or farther south to Houston, or even eastward to Shreveport, Louisiana. In the city, they might find work in kitchens, factories, or on railroads. Though danger followed them, sheriffs sometimes searched even in town, dragging escapees back to the farms. Stories of those who made it inspired others. A man who reached Houston could send word through relatives, letting others know it was possible. A young woman who found safety in Shreveport might return years later, telling her children about the night she ran with nothing but courage. These few successes lit small sparks of hope across Dallas County. Escaping did not always mean complete freedom. Many still faced poverty, discrimination, and the constant threat of capture. Yet for those who left, every step away from the farms was a step toward dignity. Their journey showed that even in the darkest time, some refused to live in chains, proving the human spirit will always search for freedom. Exposure through investigations. By 1925, whispers of hidden slavery around Dallas began to reach beyond the farms. Journalists, church leaders, and a few brave activists started to hear stories from escapees who described life under landowners protected by sheriffs. These accounts painted a shocking picture. Slavery had not truly ended. It had only changed its name. Reports of men chained in barns, women forced to pick cotton without pay, and families trapped by false debts began to circulate quietly in the city. Dallas itself was modernizing. The streets downtown were filled with cars, trolleys, and new businesses. Yet, just outside the city limits, farms were operating as if it were still the 1860s. This contradiction drew the attention of those who wanted the world to know the truth. Some reporters risked traveling into the county, speaking secretly with black workers who shared their pain in hushed tones. Every story carried danger for both the teller and the listener. Federal inspectors also began to take interest. Rumors of peonage and illegal captivity in Texas had reached Washington, and small investigations were launched. Though many were silenced by local authorities, each report added weight to the growing evidence. The courage of escapees who spoke out made it harder for the system to remain invisible. For the first time, the farms of Dallas County were not just the private domain of landowners. They were being watched. These investigations did not end the system overnight, but they cracked open its secrecy. The truth, once spoken, could not be silenced again, and the nation slowly began to see the shadow slavery that still haunted Texas. Long shadows of injustice. Even after exposure and scattered investigations, the pain of hidden slavery in Dallas during 1925 did not disappear. For those who lived it, the memories lasted a lifetime. Elderly men later told their grandchildren about picking cotton under the blazing Texas sun, watched by armed sheriffs who called them free but treated them as property. Women spoke of nights spent praying in wooden shacks, asking God for a day when their children would no longer live in fear. The scars were not only physical, but emotional. Generations grew up knowing freedom had been promised but denied. Trust in the law was broken because the very sheriffs meant to protect had been the ones enforcing captivity. Families carried the silence of their trauma, passing down stories that revealed both suffering and resilience. The city of Dallas grew into a symbol of modern Texas, with tall buildings, oil wealth, and industry. Yet beneath its progress lay the unspoken history of farms where slavery continued long after it was outlawed. The injustice did not vanish. It evolved into poverty, discrimination, and segregation that lasted for decades. But the voices of survivors kept the memory alive. Their testimonies reminded future generations that the fight for freedom was not complete in 1865, nor in 1925. It was a struggle carried on through every family that endured captivity and still found ways to resist. The long shadows of injustice shaped Dallas, and they remain a warning: when power protects cruelty, freedom must always be defended with truth and courage.